I want to talk to you a little bit about Daniel. He's about in his late teens, early 20s at this time in his life in Daniel chapter 1. And he's been taken as a captive into the kingdom of Chaldea. But the question that I really wanted to ask you is, what kind of a Christian are you? How should I evaluate myself in my walk with the Lord? Am I a thermometer kind of a Christian, or am I a thermostat kind of a Christian? And there's a difference, as all of us know, as the weather starts cooling down and we need to use our thermostat to set the temperature up. A good thermometer reflects its conditions very well. You want a good thermometer to tell you exactly what the condition is around it. A good thermostat, on the other hand, sets the temperature for its surroundings. So if I was a good thermometer kind of a Christian, I'd look and act and behave like everyone else. You wouldn't tell the difference between the way I lived my life and the way my neighbors and others lived their life. You see, I would fit right in. But if I was a good thermostat kind of a Christian, I'd be different. Especially if I lived in a culture and country that wasn't Christian. My attitude and actions would reflect something very different. And that's what I wanted to pick up and go to Daniel, because I think, even though he couldn't be called a Christian, he was a good thermometer follower of God, thermostat follower of God. Because of the way he lived, we can look and say, now that's different. Why would he live his life like that? The king of the Chaldeans, the Babylonian king, had gone and captured or had conquered the kingdom of Judah. He had taken these royal youths. There were much more than these 4 young men that he had brought back. And they were, for various reasons, maybe he wanted living trophies. Maybe he wanted to make sure the king of Judah continued to pay him his, a tax that he was charging him. Maybe he wanted him to stay in line. But for whatever reason, he took people from his royal family. And besides that, they had to have other criteria. They had to be smart. They had to be good-looking. And he brought them there, and he gave them 3 years of academic education. So you could see his curriculum. It's listed right there in verses 4, 5, and 6. Since the chair of the Christian Formation Department is here, so one thing she tells me, they have to be academically grounded. Every curriculum needs to be academically grounded. Verse 4 says, they were taught the literature and the language of the Chaldeans, so they got some academic training. Next, you want to see in your curriculum something about practical skills being provided to the student. And so Daniel and his friends were taught how to live the Chaldean way of life, the food and drink. So they got practical skills in fitting into the Chaldean society. And third, we have to see in our syllabi something about spiritual maturity. And so for these men, they changed their names. Daniel, which was changed to Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar means, may Bel, a Babylonian idol, protect his life. Hananiah was changed to Shadrach, which meant he lives according to the command of Aku, or the moon god. Mishael was changed to Meshach, again named after the Babylonian god of Aku. And Azariah was changed to Abednego, after the Babylonian god Nebo. So spiritually, they wanted them to identify with the culture and community that they were, what they knew, how to read and write, the language, the literature, the food, and now how they were to be called. That's how the world's going to come at us. They're going to want to change the way we think, the way we live, and how we believe. Our defense, the defense that Daniel employs, is almost exactly the same. The way he thought he wanted to follow God. We know from the actions that I'm going to talk about in chapter 1, from those of you who know Daniel's life, is that he stayed true to his God. And it's an interesting thing that he showed up at the age of somewhere between 17 and 20, wanting to stay true to his God because his culture back home was in a bit of a turmoil. Josiah had reigned in Judah for 31 years. And during that time, there was a little bit of a revival. They had rebuilt the temple, and worship was going on there. And Daniel and his friends were probably born about halfway through Josiah's reign. Josiah, according to the book of Chronicles, was a good king. But his two succeeding followers were listed as bad kings. So if Daniel belonged to the royal family, and if he was part of that, he could have seen among his cousins and relatives this shift between good relatives and bad relatives. You know, you have Josiah, who's a good king, and then you have bad kings follow. But his upbringing, his growth, his development obviously occurred in a place where his parents had taught him that he needs to live and obey God. I'm fairly sure that if I wanted to live as a godly person, that I would follow what the psalmist has written in chapter 119, verses 9 through 11. How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. So what is my first defense against a worldly onslaught of its values? Is to recognize that I have to follow God with my whole heart. Verse 10, I seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. I've stored up your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. So Daniel's first defense is that he's going to, and we see that in the way he acts. It says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, that so Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he made a decision. He made a decision to follow God. Now, that word in the Hebrew, in that particular chapter, looks like, well, we make a lot of decisions. I make a decision to wear a suit and tie today because I was going to preach in chapel. Not very life-changing other than my appearance for a few hours. The same word is used in Exodus chapter 9:21. And in Exodus 9:21, that word is used to describe a situation where Moses has given information in Egypt that there's going to be hail. And he sort of warns the people that if you have livestock or if you have servants who are out in the field, when this hail falls, they're going to die. And so we're told in verse 20 of Exodus 9 that some of the people listened to him and brought their livestock and slaves in, whereas others in verse 21 made up their mind, the same word, and left their livestock out there to die. A decision was made. Now, you'd say, oh, those guys are idiots. Those guys are foolish. They were not paying attention. And yes, they weren't. But I think it was much more than that. I think it was a really strong decision. Imagine, put yourself in their shoes, okay? You wake up one morning, you pick up your Starbucks coffee, you open the paper, and there on the third page where they're describing the palace news, there's a little article from Pharaoh. What it says is that there was this Hebrew magician. He showed up in the palace, he threw down a stick, and guess what? It turned into a snake. Miracles are a dime a dozen. Our Egyptian magicians did the same thing. They threw down their stick, and they became snakes too. But the Hebrew magician, now his snake was a little bit smarter. Went and swallowed the other snake, so at the end of the time, only he could get a rod back. Our poor Egyptian magicians had to walk home without a rod. Sometimes it's okay. You got a little their steps in, exercised well. You finish your coffee, you have to go and get those Hebrew slaves to make more bricks, so you ran out of your home and went there. The next day, or a few days later, Moses shows up, that same pesky Hebrew magician shows up, and he says he's going to turn water into blood. And you groan. Your plumbing is already giving you trouble. And now they're going to turn water into blood. But that morning, when you come there to get your water to fill up your coffee maker, it's blood. Yuck. What kind of coffee am I going to get this morning? Everything is blood. Everywhere there's blood. The river Nile has turned into blood. You know what my brain will tell me? That if that Hebrew magician says something, it's going to happen. He said water into blood, it turned water into blood. Well, maybe for you it did. Maybe I'm a little slower. I didn't quite believe that. I think there's something. Now, our Egyptian magicians were also equally smart. They pulled that same stunt. They could do it too. A few days later, after you've been through that, now it's on all the news channels. CNN is carrying it, Fox News is carrying it, and there's going to be frogs everywhere. The Hebrew magician says, frogs? There's frogs. There's frogs in your bed. You wake up, there's frogs all over the place. You kiss that frog, doesn't turn into a prince, stays a yucky frog, slimy toad. But you know what it is? The point I'm trying to make? Hebrew magician said, there's going to be frogs. What happens? There are frogs. Third time, you're hearing that this guy has powers that can make things happen. What happens if it's the fourth time? What happens if there are gnats all over the place? And guess what? Everybody is covering it. In fact, CNN interviewed one of our Egyptian magicians, and you know what he said? This is the finger of God. Oh my gosh. You mean there's something more supernatural than we can conjure up? And the fourth one is this flies. But this time the flies are not in Goshen where the Hebrew slaves are living. The flies are only where we Egyptians are living. Do you believe that this Hebrew magician says something that it'll happen? Even someone as dumb as me can figure that one out. Happened 4 times. So this is not something that is going to happen that I don't know. I do know. I do know every time that Hebrew magician opens his mouth and says something silly, it comes true. Blood, gnats, flies. Then he says he's going to kill all our livestock. And again, it doesn't affect the Hebrew people. It only affects us. Do I believe? Whatever you say. It took me 7 years to do a 5-year degree. I can figure it out. Hebrew magician says something, it's going to happen. So when he says boils, now it's getting personal because I'm itching and scratching all over the place. I know it's happened in my body. I can feel it. It affected my life, and now I can feel it. That was the 6th plague. The 7th is what is being talked about in Exodus 9, 20, and 21. It's the 7th plague where the Hebrew magician says that there's going to be hail, and if you leave your livestock there. Do you think you believe it? After it happening 7 times and having to scratch yourself with boils the last time? Of course you believe. Everybody believes it. It's true. It's happening. So why would I leave my livestock in the field? Why would I, after having seen experience after experience, decide to leave my livestock in the field? Because I am going to do it. It's my decision. You're not going to tell me anything that I am not going to do. I'm going to do it because I want to do it. I'm going to let them die because they're my livestock, they're my slaves. It's my decision. I'm going to take it on the chin. It's going to hurt me financially, but I'm doing it. Now take that emotion, take that energy, and put it in Daniel 1:8, because that's exactly what Daniel's doing. He's going to obey God because he wants to obey God, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to follow God, and you ain't telling him nothing. That's Daniel 8. That's the decision he's making. And I want you to understand that when they make a decision, that's what it meant. It didn't mean the same thing as me wearing my suit this morning. It meant a determination to live the way God wanted him to live. He was not going to defile himself. And so he's not going to have any of the meat that was meat that is being offered to him. He's not going to drink the wine. And so he goes to Ashpenaz and tells him that. And Ashpenaz tells him, my head bone's connected to my neck bone's connected to my backbone connected to my feet bone. I like the arrangement. I don't want any disturbance taking place. Don't want to remove that neck bone and place it somewhere else. And that's what's going to happen to me if I don't give you meat and wine. Not going to do it. So Daniel goes back to him with another plan. Now, it's very interesting. The Bible does say that God had caused Ashpenaz to have favor and compassion. Daniel doesn't know that. Daniel's acting by faith. That God is going to take care of his side of things. I have to walk by faith in the light that I know. But the Bible is telling us that, yes, God is acting. He's having Ashpenaz have favor and compassion. So Daniel comes up with a plan. Hey, what if I forget the meat and forget the wine? What if I do vegetables and water? And Ashpenaz says, okay, 10 days. You know what I do when I want to lose weight? I go for vegetables, right? Salad. I'm off meats. No red meat for me. And what the Bible says is that in those 10 days, those guys ate vegetables, drank water, and added weight. Now, I know most of my diets go that way too, but that's what happened. They got fatter in 10 days. Now, actually, nothing happens in 10 days. Usually my weight stays the same. But in 10 days, they got fatter enough, stronger enough for Ashpenaz to say, okay, I buy your plan. You're on vegetables and water diet for the remaining 3 years. Now, that isn't an easy decision. Remember, after a few minutes, we're all going for lunch, right? I go sit down in Anderson Commons, and I can smell that meat that's been prepared. It smells so great. I'm ready to eat it. What if you're sitting in the cafeteria and they're serving you food, and you have some asparagus comes by? Okay, looks good. Carrots come by. Okay, you got the green and the red. And then comes the meat, and it smells so good. It's just been cooked by the chef who's cooking for the king. This is not meat making meat in my oven. This is the king's chef preparing the best tenderloin that you're going to eat. And the guy next to you eats it, then it comes to you. It's right under your nose. It's so unfair. And you've got to pass it to the next person. And you do, because you made up your mind. And they do the same thing with the wine. It goes by. And you succeeded. You stood true. You go home. 4 hours later, you know what's going to happen? 4 hours, maybe 5. You're going to have dinner. And you know what they're cooking? They've got that same meat. So delicious, yet again. And this time you have to pass it again because you made a decision. 3 times a day. Every time you show up. 4 hours apart. 5 hours apart. You have to resist the devil and be faithful. No one's watching. No one's watching. You could eat it 1 year. 365. I'm bad at math. So say 300 divided by 3, that's 900. Say around 1,000 times. Every 5 hours, 1,000 times you test it. 3 years, 3,000 times. That is not easy. Now, all the glory of making that decision fades away in the reality of the challenge that you're going to face. So if you're going to decide to follow God and you're tested, it's an every day, every hour by hour testing. It's not easy, but God is with you. Guess what happens at the end of the time? When they're tested by Nebuchadnezzar, when they go for that final exam, they are smarter than their professors. There's nobody in the land who's as smart as these 4 men, because they were faithful to God.